Good evening, everyone. Um, Please let's indicate if you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, thank you very much. My name is Hussein Mahadi, and I'll be moderating today's session on entertainment, business, and law. And our topic for today is the film business and law. We have our mentor with us today, Mrs. Zerona Duke Phillips. If she's on the call, thank you very much for choosing to mentor us today, and welcome to the call. So quickly before we jump into hearing from our mentor on the topic for today, I will make a few announcements. Permit me to share my screen. Sorry. So about the program, Gypsy Mentorship and Internship Program is a quarterly program for students and young professionals across Africa. Our mentees are afforded the opportunity to access valuable advice, training, network, mentorship, internship, discussion forum, industry updates, and resource materials from experienced mentors across the globe. And the program seeks to encourage continuous training, development, and evolution in Nigeria, Africa, and around the world. You can watch some of our videos on our social media platforms, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, by searching for Gypsy. Some of the objectives of the program is also to provide easy access, guidance, training, and resource material for our students and our young professionals who are mentees, to facilitate dialogue and network among experienced and less experienced practitioners and stakeholders, to transform mentees into mentors and leaders for the next generation, and to facilitate further mentorship, internship, scholarship, and job placement for our mentees. That's briefly what Gypsy Mentorship and Internship Program objectives are, and also about the program. So registration for a 30-minute one-on-one session, of course, it's more than 30 minutes. We just use that for flyers purpose. Having one-on-one session with your favorite mentor, you can always reach out to one of the Gypsy team to help you through, or use the link on your screen to register and get life hacks, secrets, lessons, and directions on your career path from your favorite mentor. So this is one of the opportunities Gypsy also provides for its mentees. And registration for this first quarter of the fourth quarter of the program is still currently ongoing. In case if you have colleagues, friends, relatives that you want to share with, we take all the courses on, almost all the courses on the flyer right now. We take intellectual property, artificial intelligence, the energy industry, fintech, health tech, and law. We are not taking patents and blockchain for this quarter. We'll be taking it first quarter of 2024. And we take data privacy and protection law and entertainment business law, of course, which is the class that we are currently on. I'll be reading our mentor's profile, our mentor profile for today, Ms. Zerona Duke Philip, before we jump into the business for today. Zerona Duke Philip is an alumna of the University of Pennsylvania Carey School of Law and the New York Film Academy. With certificates in filmmaking, producing, Zerona Duke Philip is a New York Bar and Nigerian Bar certified attorney, possessing varied experience in intellectual property law, arts, media and entertainment law, and project finance. She has advised on diverse transactions from multi-million-dollar infrastructure projects and transcontinental financial acquisition to music licensing, film and theater productions, trademark and copyright protection, and enforcement. As a songwriter and filmmaker, She has a unique perspective and understanding of the creative aspect, as well as the business of entertainment. She uses this perspective in advising and advocating for her clients in the various IP and entertainment industry. Guys, let's welcome Her Excellency Miss Serona Duke Philip on the call. Please let me see your reactions welcoming our mentor on the call and how happy we all are to have her on the call today. We look forward to learning a lot from her vast knowledge and experience in the entertainment business industry. Thank you very much once more. I'm sorry, my camera is not clear, so you can't see my face clearly. Ms. Verona, it's over to you now. Our topic for today is the music business and law, and we are all eager to listen to you, learn from you today. Welcome and thank you very much.
Thank you. I hope it's film business and law, because that is the presentation that I have prepared for you. No music business and law. Okay. May I share my screen?
Yes.
It's okay. Okay. All right. All right. So, understanding film production transactions. This is a very, very key area of law. It's an area that we cannot afford to, do away with, particularly given the landscape, the current landscape in entertainment law and, particularly film in Nigeria. We're seeing our films getting exported. In fact, I think our films are arguably, one of our biggest exports. And I would say at this point in time, it's at least neck and neck with oil, if not, exceeding that altogether. So it's an area that, I think we've gone past the point where we can ignore it. And for legal practitioners, particularly those who are interested in entertainment law, this is an area of law that I think, it is worth knowing about. And so essentially in the 20 minutes, I think I'm going to try and whip through. We might not actually go over everything that I have in this presentation, but I will make it available. And of course, I'm happy to answer any questions that you do have, but I will try and cover as much as I can in the time allotted. But what I hope you will go away with is that you will understand the life cycle of a film production, that you will understand key production transactions, acknowledge the crucial role of lawyers, and also understand the key points to cover in a production or in a contract that you're doing. Okay, let me see. Right, so I will skip through that part. Yes, so essentially we're going to first start on, my apologies, by the way, I'm at home today. So if you hear any, nice, beautiful music in the form of children, that is my crew. I apologize, but I hope they won't distract us too much. So anyway, so we'll talk about the film production life cycle, the key players and their roles, the type of film production transactions that you should be familiar with. We'll look at the legal and contractual aspects of film, of a film production. We'll look at the challenges and risks that you should be aware of, and hopefully we have enough time to go over a case study of the film Oloture. I hope I pronounced that correctly, or I should have practiced at least pronouncing that. And then finally, I hope that we'll be able to look over future trends. That said, like I said earlier, I will make this available so that you can, and if I have to gloss over or skip over any particular bit, you can go back over. Okay, so like we've said, cinema has played a significant role in shaping societies. And in Nigeria, the film industry is recognized as a major contributor to the national gross domestic product. So since its emergence, Nollywood has become recognized as being at the forefront of film production, surpassing Hollywood. And so, like I said earlier, we're going to look into why this, we're going to look into the film production transactions. A lot of people think that going into film production is just a matter of, oh, you're a lawyer, right? You've done contracts before. Yes, but entertainment law, as I'm sure you know by now, is an interesting subset of the law, which was essentially formed by the practitioners of that industry, right? So just because you've been practicing corporate law does not mean that you can practice entertainment law, because you have to understand the business of entertainment in order to practice it. This is key in many different industries, but it's essential in entertainment law. You can't get around it because the law is essentially formed by its practitioners. So, film production life cycle. Sorry. So the film production life cycle is a comprehensive journey, from concept to the screen, and it encompasses multiple stages of planning, execution, and distribution. So you start with pre-production, then you go into production, and then post-production. So I'm going to talk about those in a little bit more detail. So pre-production refers to the period before principal photography. And during this time, the idea is conceived, or maybe you read a book, or you saw a pretty picture and, a thought came into mind. That's the producer, of course. And so they decide that, what, this would make a really cool film. So at that point in time, you need to start thinking about chain of title. I prefer, and I advise my clients to, at this point in time, start thinking about a lawyer, even if you're not ready to engage one, because at this point in time, the chain of titles, the clock of the chain of title starts ticking, right? Especially once you start the development process. Are you getting other producers to work on this with you? You'll need to agree on how this is going to work, right? Are you going to be, if it's a book, like I mentioned earlier, are you going to be optioning that book or trying to get those rights? An agreement is going to come at that point in time. And of course, like if, for instance, you have to actually buy, pay for the options or the rights, then you might need some financing. And unless you're dipping into your pocket, some financing agreements may be needed. So development agreements, they're anything from writers' agreements, that's like screenwriter, they might be the, financing agreements, excuse me. And then the options and rights agreements. So essentially what an option is that you're saying that I want to make this film, and I would like for you, the author of this book, to please give me for a period of time an exclusive right to do this. And if I don't do it within that period of time, then the rights will revert to you and you can sell them to someone else, right? So so all of those bear some consideration, and particularly legal consideration. And they all go into chain of title because, let's keep in mind throughout this entire thing that intellectual property is the bedrock of entertainment, right? Because these are all creations of the mind that are given legal and property status, right? And so anytime you're thinking about any kind of ownership that anyone may have, you have to, particularly when it's tied to a film, you have to make sure that that license for you to use that, or the ownership itself, is conferred to you. You have to own it and hold it at every single point in time to protect yourself and protect your production. So moving on to production itself. So the production period is when you start making the film, like principal photography, the cameras come out, all of that stuff. So at this point in time, you're going to be thinking about above the line and below the line agreements, location agreements, and insurance agreements. There are a bunch of other ones, but these are the key ones that I wanted to highlight. So above the line, below the line agreements, those are above the line refer to the people, how do they put it? The celebrities in the film, right? The people that you'd see at the Oscars. They are the actors, they are the the director, the cinematographer, right? And so those people are above the line. Their contracts are usually, they can be very, very detailed as far as, the kind of amenities that they should have. For directors may want to work with particular cinematographers. So that would be, or may be written into their contracts. In fact, the director may want to bring in an entire crew, right? And so you're essentially, you may essentially have to give over more of the creative license to the director than, initially you may have planned on. And so, those are some other considerations that as a producer, you would need to think about legally, right? And you would also need to make sure that as you're drafting these above the line contracts, whether it's the cinematographer, the director, the actor, that this portrayal or creative property that they're essentially going to be creating in their work on the film will be owned by you. Okay. Right, post-production, we're looking at the editing, the visual effects agreements, music clearance, sound agreements. Music clearance is essential. It can, if it's not planned for, it can be incredibly expensive. And also, if it's not planned for, sorry, is everything okay? Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Yeah, the
Okay.
post-production.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, wonderful, thank you. All right, so yes, with music, if it's not planned for, you can end up having your film scrapped, this is the worst case scenario, right? But as lawyers, we kind of have to plan for the worst case scenario and be prepared for it. But in such a case, if you use music that you have not licensed, you could end up with a massive issue on your hands. Either, they will come for the film, you might not be able to distribute the film, and that means that you're not making money from the film, or that you may end up having to fork over a lot of money that you weren't anticipating. And of course, that would end up putting a dent in your profit line. So these things should never, ever be ignored. Another key thing is distribution, right? Fine, you make the film, where is it going? So are you doing, the traditional distribution, like are you putting it in the cinema, or are you going to put it on streaming services, video on demand? Are you going to send it to airplanes? Is it going to be aired on British Airways, for instance, right? So all of these considerations need to be thought about, and there are legal implications to that. For instance, are you licensing it to this particular distributor for a certain period of time? And what is the territory that they can distribute it to? Is it just in Africa, or is it worldwide? All of those things need to be thought about, and they need to be put in, because, if you give one distributor global, then you cannot give another distributor, at least in the same line, the same amount of territory. And so if you haven't considered that when you're making the first contract, you might have an issue in the next one. And so as lawyers, we, our job is to make sure that we're thinking about these things, oftentimes for our clients, and bringing it to their attention, yes, okay. Right, so key players and roles. You have the producer, who manages the production and the finances. Oftentimes, the producer is also the one who actually comes up with the concept and sees it through to the very end, right? They are essentially the key creator of this film. They're the one who brings it to life. Then you have the distributor. They're the ones who promote and distribute the film. They bring it to your TV screens, to your phone, to your cinema screens or what have you. Then you have the lawyers, us. We manage the legal aspects and the contracts to make sure that everything is shipshape, right? And then you have the talent agents and the managers. They represent and negotiate for the actors, depending on the situation. Typically in like Hollywood, for example, they have a very, very well-developed scheme. When it comes to Hollywood, you have the guilds, you have the talent managers and the agents. So it's all very organized. Everyone has their place, agents, managers, lawyers. Oftentimes, though, they might end up piggybacking off of each other. Other times, it's well delineated and, you handle this, you handle that. And so sometimes if you're a lawyer for an actor, you may end up negotiating for them. But typically, even here, to a large extent, the actors' negotiation is handled by their agents or their manager. And then last but certainly not least, and this is by no means an exhaustive list, you have the financial institutions, right? They provide the funding, the financial expertise, and financial institutions, that's holdover, and by this I actually mean anyone who's bringing financing. So it might be an investor, it might be like an angel investor, it might be a venture capitalist company, essentially anyone who's providing financing. And so this group of people will collaborate to bring the film from idea to screen. They might join the production from the very beginning, or they may join it, throughout the process of this life cycle. But essentially, they are all integral and vital to presenting the final production. So there are various film production transactions. I'm going to talk about finance, distribution, talent, and intellectual property in particular. Financing, we know that money makes the world go around, right? So there's no point talking about making a film if you're not going to talk about the money that's going to be involved in making it come to fruition, right? So financing transactions will involve securing the funding for the production, whether through investors, loans, grants, studio backing, in the US. Over here, you may have, we have like our studios as well, and other film production companies, right? Then you have the distribution transactions. Those involve negotiating agreements with distributors to showcase the film in theaters or on streaming platforms or through physical copies, DVD, for instance, for anyone who still buys DVDs. Then we have talent transactions that involves the agreements with the actors, the directors, crew. Oh, sorry, apologies. I think I was speeding so fast, I didn't even talk about below the line crew when I spoke about above the line. So just as an aside, below the line crew are the crew members, the other crew members, the gaffer, the person holding the boom mic, the assistant director, all of those people would be below the line. Very, very important as well, just as important as above the line, just less acclaim, so to speak. Okay, back to this. Intellectual property transactions will entail acquiring the rights to the scripts, the stories, existing franchises, and ensuring that legal ownership and permissions are obtained for the creative adaptations. Okay. Next, I think I hinted before that I was going to spend a bit more time on film financing and debt, but I'm not sure how much time I actually do have. So film financing, equity, debt. Debt involves borrowing money, which you have to pay back. And so your lawyer is going to look into making sure that you're getting a favorable deal, that, it's not going to be something that at the end of the day, you'd wish you hadn't even gotten the debt in the first place, right? Equity, that involves you selling part of your ownership or stakes in the film to investors, so they would share in the profits rather than you having to pay them back. You're now actually just sharing the profits. And then you have pre-sale financing, where with this, if you manage to, maybe in the development period, pre-production, if you're able to get a distributor to come on the production, maybe because you already have a really great actor and director who's invested in the product, or not the product, the film production, and have said that they'll be involved. You might get a distributor right off the bat, even though you haven't actually gone into production, right? So with that distribution agreement, in some places, so certainly in America, you can take that contract to the bank and say, hey, hold this as collateral and give me a bank loan, right? So we're still working on that here. And hopefully, it'll be, especially with the trajectory that we're going in, we'll be heading in that direction of being able to secure financing that way. In Nigeria, the powers that be are sitting up and taking stock of the industry. And so there are some tax benefits and grants that are emerging. And for example, the Nigerian Film Corporation support filmmakers, and BOI, actually, I have to give a special mention to BOI. They make a point to give these grants, and it's a bit of a process. And, if you have a lawyer who is conversant with this, it's worth it getting those kinds of grants or those loans, because particularly with BOI, for filmmakers, the interest rate is much lower than you would in any of our regular banks, right? And so that is just there to incentivize the industry and to help. But that said, there are a number of loops, for lack of a better word, that you may have to jump through. And so as lawyers, it's imperative that we understand exactly what those loops are, what is required, and how to navigate them so we can advise our clients properly. Right, so distribution agreements, I just want to quickly go over some key terms that you must make sure is in them. The rights granted, so are you giving them, what territories are you giving them? What medium? By mediums, I mean, is it video on demand? Is it cinema? What is it? And for how long, right? You also need to make sure that you talk about delivery and technical specifications. And this is key, especially if you are the attorney for the distributor, right? For instance, if I'm the attorney for Netflix, I want to make sure that the product that's coming to me is going to match up with my the quality that I'm assuring my customers, that they're going to get, right? And so if a filmmaker gives me subpar quality film, I need to be able to say that absolutely not. I am not bound by this agreement, and, give me my money back. All right. You also want to have a delivery schedule. And again, this is key for both parties, but, if you are the distributor yourself, you oftentimes will be dealing with marketing, right? Sometimes there might be agreements where, and I actually mentioned this, marketing and promotion. Sometimes the filmmaker and the distributor may agree to share in the marketing, the joys of marketing, which are very, very expensive, right? And so in such a case, you would need to plan your marketing schedule. When are you going to put out the flyers and all of that? If you've done that, especially if you've put the date that the film is going to be released on those flyers, and the film is not delivered on time, you're going to have an issue. All right, so the delivery schedule needs to be put in the contract, and there need to be, terms for, what happens if this is not if this is not delivered on time, and also, prepare for any delays or contingencies. Quick one, you also want to talk about the revenue sharing and the payment terms, expenses, recoupment, term and termination, governing law, of course, dispute resolution, governing law. Some jurisdictions are more favorable than others. So you need to know who you're representing and what jurisdiction works best for them, and make sure that you push for that. Okay, and we spoke about talent agreements already. So as a final point on this, please make sure that all your talent agreements, from the director, the actors, everybody in between, the makeup artist, everybody, it is a work made for hire. Any intellectual property that is created by their contribution to this film production is a work made for hire, or Nigeria is a commissioned work. They do not own any intellectual property. This is imperative, and I cannot stress it enough, but it's absolutely imperative that it is clear that any copyright that is created by virtue of their work belongs to the producer. This is essential for the chain of title, right? And so all of these contracts that we've been discussing and that we've been creating, they're all stacking up, right? They're all stacking up to essentially create our chain of title. Okay, so, sorry, I did something. Bear with me. Right, moving on. Intellectual property. I don't think I need to spend too much time on this, right? Because I think at this point in time, JIIPC has you well covered. Copyright protection, must. Music and soundtrack licensing, I've already spoken about that. Trademark, let me point out, right? A lot of film productions actually raise money by partnering with brands. For example, you might watch a movie and notice that, oh my goodness, that guy is driving an Aston Martin, right? Why do you even notice that he's driving an Aston Martin? Because they position the camera to capture the logo, of the car, so that you see, oh, wow, James Bond is driving an Aston Martin. Aston Martins are cool, right? I should go out and buy an Aston Martin, right? So that's a trademark in effect. And what they have done is for Aston Martin to be able to put their car in, the 007 film, they offered the film a lot of money. And so, that's another way to secure financing, by essentially saying that, you know what, we're going to put your brand up and down. On the reverse, though, for a lot of brands, you actually have to ask permission before you put their brands on there, just to make sure that they're going to be okay with their brand being associated with your film, right? And you never want a situation where you think it's okay, but then they come back and say, absolutely not, take it down, and you have to start either cutting, cutting shots, or you might actually need to start blurring brands and, logos, things like that. It ends up being very messy. And as lawyers, we want to make sure that we avoid that entirely. Okay. Legal and contractual aspects. I hope I'm not going too fast, and I hope I still have you with me. All right, so
yes, we still have us with you, and you're not going too fast, and you still have time.
Okay.
So
okay, maybe I might slow down a little bit. All right, so the legal and contractual aspects of a film production, you, of course, will have to deal with contract negotiation and drafting. You can't get away with it. You need to make sure, though, when you're drafting these contracts, they're as clear as possible, right? When you're working in the entertainment industry, your clients are creatives. So first and foremost, their minds are on the work that they're trying to produce, right? Our job is to make it as simple and easy as possible. And I think that this should be the same across board. But, you know, other industries, it's, you know, they're okay with, you know, however complicated contracts can be and all of that. But I think as, you know, practitioners of entertainment or practitioners in the entertainment industry, we need to make sure that we are, that we just make our contracts as easy to digest as possible for our clients, just so that we can protect them even more and they can get back to the work that they need to do quickly. You know, there's no point in us saying that, okay, we're going to go over this contract to make sure you're okay with it. And then we have to end up spending like 4 or 5 hours explaining every single line, right? So if you're drafting the contract, try and draft it in a way that your client can glance through it and immediately digest it. That's my 2 cents. And then, of course, negotiation, you're going to, you know, work with the agent or the manager or on your own on behalf of your client, depending on the, you know, particular situations. Just make sure that you're getting the best deal for your client. And always remember that your client is your client, right? You can try and be fair, but never be fair at the expense of your client. That's not your job, okay? The other party should have their own lawyer, right? So if you see a way to, you know, put in a clause that will benefit your client, go ahead and do that. And it's for them to say, actually, no, we don't like that. Okay. And then you can find a middle ground, but don't compromise to the detriment of your client unnecessarily. Right. But altogether, just make sure that the contract is very well drafted, that you've taken note of every possible thing that could possibly come up. Right. You need to minimize uncertainties, potential conflicts, you know, just anything that you could possibly do to make sure that the production of this film is going to be as seamless as possible. Make sure you do that at the onset for any contract that you're drafting on the film production. As lawyers, we always have to look at the worst case scenario, right? So start from there and work backwards. Right? What could go wrong in this distribution agreement? Okay, now how do I mitigate that to make sure that if it does happen, it won't be so bad, or to make sure that it doesn't happen at all, right? That's the kind of thinking that you should be doing. And always pay attention to the commas and the full stops, the ands, the thes, those tiny pieces of a contract can make or break it, can change a sentence entirely in its meaning. All right, on to rights and ownership. You also want to make sure that you are establishing very clear rights and ownerships of every single agreement that you're going to be drafting. I'll keep on stressing this, so forgive me, but that, what do you call it? Chain of title, imperative. And the chain of title, essentially, it's a title, right? So imagine a chain, it's all linked. And so essentially throughout the process, you're just handing over rights to rights to rights to rights to rights. Okay. And you want to make sure that at the end of the day, you're the one who's holding onto that chain, and that every single one of those titles is under your control. Right. And when you're even dealing with distribution agreements, with Netflix, with cinemas, all of those people, particularly if you're dealing with, you know, the Western powers that be, they're very particular about that. We're also particular about it over here. And oftentimes they will not want to touch your film or your client's film if they're not able to prove that they have chain of title to every single parts of this agreement, because nobody wants trouble. All right. They're not, you know, interested in wading into your wahala. Okay. So just make sure that there's no wahala at all. Right. Intellectual property protection. I spoke about having that commissioned for or work for hire point. Essentially, just make sure that your client or the producer owns the intellectual property. sometimes you might have situations where you'll have a bit of pushback, particularly with some of the above the line crew, the directors or the cinematographers. It's rare. It's very rare because it's pretty much established in the industry that this is what should happen. But on those occasions, you need to be very skillful in your negotiation to make sure that your client does own the intellectual property rights. You just can't get around it. They have to. And so you'll just have to be very skillfully, try not to, anger them. You may need to play on egos and things like that, but make sure that your client, if your client is the producer, your client must walk away with the intellectual property rights ownership. And then dispute resolution and arbitration. You never want this to happen, but should in case it does, make sure that it's clear from the onset exactly what kind of dispute resolution you're going for. Now with the new Copyright Act 2022, there are new, or rather updated mechanisms for what do you call it? The multi-door court system, particularly with arbitration, and the Nigerian Copyright Commission, I believe, is overseeing it just to make sure that we have this other avenue for dispute resolution as opposed to just going to the traditional route of going to court. And of course, arbitration often takes a lot less time, and it's a lot, clearer. You don't have to deal with all of the, craziness, or not craziness, the on and on and on and on of courts, whether, because you can end up appealing. Arbitration, it's final, that's it. So that's that. Challenges and risks. Legal complexities, intellectual property rights, licensing agreements, contracts with various stakeholders. All of these need to be thought through very, very carefully, through the lens of your client, what your client wants to achieve, and just make sure that you're coming up with the right structure for them. Okay, make sure to do this so that you can avoid unnecessary legal disputes, financial setbacks. I discussed some of them earlier on. If you don't think properly about, for example, music, or the use of a trademark, you may end up having to spend a lot more money than you planned on, or lose a lot of money if you don't properly deal with these from the onset. You also have financial risks that you have to be careful of. So film production, it's like a project finance project, right? You only get your returns when people buy into what it is that you have created. So it's usually will carry a great deal of risk. Most filmmakers try and set off these risks by attaching to the film known and popular entities. That's why often they'll go for the stars. These celebrities are known as vehicles, right? And it's not a mistake. They are known as vehicles because they help drive the film, right, to success. They know that if I put this guy on the poster, that people go, oh, I like that guy. Let me go and see this film just because he's in it. I want to see how he portrays this character, But that said, there have been many, many movies where you have a huge actor in the film and it still tanks, right? So you can't get away with it ultimately, but you can try and mitigate it by meticulous financial planning, risk assessment, just trying to, even these small things, getting the right actors, the right producer, just being really capitalistic and strategic about every single aspect of it is crucial for the film. And it's not just a job for producers. Even as lawyers, we can advise on this. We can, look into the market and also advise generally, not just on, our job is not just to look at the contract, read and draft, right? Our job is to advise on the entire ecosystem and the industry, so in that regard, lawyers are very, very important. You also need to be careful when it comes to creative conflicts. I mentioned earlier that a director may want to bring in their entire crew, right? They'll say, I only work with this cinematographer, I only work with this gaffer, or the cinematographer says, okay, well, I'm working with this director, but I'm going to bring in my own lighting person, all of those things. And as lawyers, we need to be conversant with the industry. If you can, know the different players in the industry and what they like to do, where their preferred people to work with, this will help us in advising our clients beforehand. Even anything that you could possibly do to keep the train moving, right? And to just forestall any stalls or prevent any stalls in the production, is amazing. Negotiation skills, absolutely imperative. Be able to communicate effectively, make it, you're in charge of this, you're in charge of that. Let's not get our papers crossed or anything like that. Those are all essential to manage the conflicts. And then, of course, regulatory compliance. Depending on where your movie is being shot, depending on where you want to release the film, you need to know what the rules are. Okay, so you can't go to certain countries, for example, and release a film that's going to be that's contrary to their moral rules, for instance, right? You have to be aware of this. If there are any regulations that must be complied with, for example, with the censors board, you need to be aware of that so that you can give yourself enough time to perhaps screen it to them. And if they have any issues, you can go back to the drawing board, and make the necessary changes. So as lawyers, we need to know what these rules are in whatever jurisdiction our clients are working in, so that we can properly advise them well ahead of time and prevent anything from delaying or stopping the production altogether. Okay, we made it to the case study. So Oloture is a gripping Nigerian thriller that delves into the dark and dangerous world of human trafficking and investigative journalism. The production of this impactful film involved various complex transactions and collaborations. So we went from, or rather the film goes from, the development and script acquisition. The film was actually based on, or at least a portion of it, inspired by, let's say, an article that was written by, I said her name later on, but anyway, we'll come to it. But essentially, it was an article by a reporter who actually went undercover as a prostitute, and she came out and wrote this expose, right? So the production company, the film production company, Ebony Life Films, had to negotiate the acquisition of the intellectual property rights, the options, from the to the story from Premium Times Services Limited, who are the owners of Premium Times, the newspaper that it was published in. And then they also had to work with the script writers, Yinka Ogun and Craig Freeman on, actually to create the script out of that, right? Any other financial considerations were done at this point in time, at least with respect to the acquisition of intellectual property rights, or the initial acquisition. Then they went into funding and financing. For this endeavor, they used various methods, from equity financing to grants. They got money from NGOs, and they also obtained loans, to and they did this very skillfully, right? So even the loans were for particular aspects of the film production, just to, as opposed to the entire production. So by doing so, they're able to mitigate the risk even with the loan acquisition, to ensure that they're not biting off too much, and they are offsetting that with the other types of financing or funding, whether it's equity or grants that are not actually going to end up costing them money, so to speak. So that was quite smart of them. From there, they went on to casting and talent. They used Sharon Oja, who is, at that time, she was building quite a name for herself. And by this point in time, she has built quite a name for herself. And so she was quite key in, as far as like using, what do you call it, as being a vehicle, a star vehicle in the film. They also used casting agents, talent agents, managers, to negotiate these contracts. Then they had to get the locations. They had to identify the various locations that they were going to use. They needed to get the necessary permits, obtain the equipment and all of that. So those were more technical contracts. Usually it might just be like a page, a waiver, type format. But that said, they are still important. And as a lawyer, especially if it's not coming from you, you would need to read it through very, very carefully to just make sure that, there are no surprises that are subtly embedded. And then they went on to post-production and editing, right? So after this point in time, they would have had to deal with the editor and a film, right? So after you've actually shot the film, after the director, the cinematographer, everyone is on set, the actors, you have like this, you just have like a whole bunch of scenes, right? And it's not pieced together, the end might actually be in the beginning, all of that, right? You then go to an editing room, and this is typically the editor and the director, because the director actually has a vision in mind for how he wants to tell the story, right? And so the director oftentimes will work with the editor, and they will piece it together. They'll cut here, they'll cut there, and they'll just, cut it and piece it together in a way that will tell the most compelling story. At this point in time, you're also looking at sound design, you're looking at visual effects, music licensing, all of this with a view to, where can we put these additional, je ne sais quoi, in this film to just make it pop, right? And so these are the things that are going to be thought about in this point in time, but by this time you're thinking about music licensing, if you haven't thought of it already. You're as a lawyer, you're going to be drafting those agreements for sure by now. You're going to be dealing with the sound editor, you're going to be dealing with the visual editor, and all those contracts and everything in between. And then you will now get to the distribution portion. At this point in time, there was a finished film, right? And so for this movie, Oluture, they decided to do its initial release at the Carthage Film Festival in Tunisia. The following year, Netflix acquired it and began airing it October 2nd, 2020. So they, with Netflix, they would have come up with an agreement as far as how much Netflix was going to purchase it for, because at this, if Netflix is purchasing it, then is at that time it was going to be streamed exclusively on Netflix, right? So you weren't going to be seeing it in the cinemas. And so you can use that as a negotiation platform of, increase the money because this is, where the money is going to come from. That said, though, it's not everybody who can negotiate it in such a way. They did tell a compelling story, and so they did have that negotiation power. But with Netflix, essentially, they were going to have to negotiate. Okay, are you going to have exclusivity over our film? For how long is this exclusivity going to be? Are we going to still be able to put it on other platforms, for example, on airplanes I mentioned earlier, things like that. Those are the conversations that had to be had at that point in time. And then, of course, once that's decided as far as distribution is concerned, they're now going to have to get into the actual sharing of revenue for all these people, especially, when you're talking about the debt that they may have incurred, when you're talking about the other investors, the other investors in the film. How are they getting their money? At what point in time what priority, that's the word, what priority do they take in revenue sharing or profit sharing, right? And if you're the attorney for an investor, you want to make sure that your client is going to be getting their money sooner rather than later. You don't want them to have to wait in line, because at the end of the line, is there going to be anything left, right? So depending on who you're representing, make sure you know exactly where they stand as far as priority. Now, I've been talking about chain of title. I think at this point in time, it's chain of title. But Oluture was very, very fortunate that they did not ignore this, because they actually were did she sue or did she threaten to sue? But essentially, what's her name? Tobore Ovori, apologies, wanted to sue Ebony Life Films for copyright infringement because they said that they used 75% or an incredible amount of her story in creating this film, and that they did not compensate her for it. They did not get the proper authorization for it, right? Copyright is the exclusive right to exploit the works of your mind, right? And the act actually specifies what can qualify for copyright protection, right? But provided that it's original, it falls under those clear categories, and it is fixed in a way that we as human beings can see it or hear it, perceive it in a meaningful way, then you have copyright protection. And so she was saying that her copyright was infringed because they did not get the proper permission before they used it to create this film. Mo Abudu, the CEO of Ebony Life Films, debunked the allegations, and she said that actually we did speak to her, and we actually did we offered her 5% of the proceeds from the film to be given to her charity or her NGO, or an NGO of her choice. But that on its side, moreover, more importantly rather, they stated or she stated unequivocally that they went to the actual owners of the copyright and obtained their authorization to use the story. Now, the owners of the copyright are Premium Time Services, because they, the Ms. Ovuri, when she sold her story to them, I'm not privy to that particular contract, but essentially, from what has been presented, it appears as if, it essentially became like a work made for hire, or that they had purchased the copyright outright from her, and so they could do whatever they wanted to do with it. But basically, it meant that they were the only people that Ebony Life Films needed to speak to, and they spoke to them, and they got the permission. Whatever payments needed to be made were made, to cement this, and there you have it, really. So that allowed them to have that particular chain, that particular chain link, of the chain of title secured, and that was what altogether protected them from this copyright infringement claim. If they had decided that, oh, this sounds like a really good story, let's just go ahead and use it, because after all, many people have this or a similar story, the story may be entirely different, right? They may have ended up having a lot more back and forth. So we shall move on to future trends and opportunities in this area.
Okay, Ma, I think you need to speed up now. You have
Okay.
10 more minutes.
I have up to 10 more minutes. Oh my goodness, that is so much time. Don't worry, I'm almost done. Okay, so the regulations are changing, the times are changing. We have AI, we have all of this stuff. One, alternative funding models and investment contracts, crowdfunding, private investments. Yeah, okay. All of those play a large role now in today's legal landscape as it pertains to film. So we do need to, as lawyers, be very conversant in them, so that we can advise our clients appropriately. And then you have international co-productions and collaborations. We are living more and more in a global neighborhood, right? And so you can't really get away with only knowing what's happening in your yard. You need to know what's going on across the pond, so that, because it may affect us, it might affect us now, it might affect us later on, but like it or not, we're all touched by it, everything that's happening throughout the world. We also need to be aware of legal frameworks and regulatory compliances. These are always changing, they're always shifting, and so you have to just stay abreast with everything, so that you can properly advise your clients through anything that changes. And then finally, I mentioned AI. It's reshaping the film industry. We're going to be looking at, in the near future, situations where films are, being written by artificial intelligence. Who owns the copyright in those situations? We have a situation in the future where the cinematography is completely done by AI. I don't know if it's coming, but we have to be aware of these. But one key thing that is popping up, and there's more conversation about this, is the first example I mentioned. Essentially, for AI, ChatGPT, they're taking on knowledge that they've acquired from previously, published or done work, right? And so the issue we're having now is that we're moving closer and closer to a situation where human participation may not be as required as it was before or now, right? So in that case, especially since the human participation of the past was what is used to equip the artificial intelligence with the knowledge that they are now using to, fulfill these roles, shouldn't some, recognition be given to those who actually did the work, the historical owners of this work from which this knowledge was gotten? That's a question that is going around right now that a lot of us are thinking about, and I urge you to also think about that question, because 100% it's something that we're going to have to deal with in our lifetime. I told you I was almost done. So thank you for having me. Thank you for listening. And happy to answer any questions that you have. I'm quite impressed that we were able to get through this. I think you might have given me some extra time, so I thank you for that. But once again, thank you for having me.
Yeah, definitely. We gave you lots of extra time. Thank you very much, Zerona Duke. It was very, very informative. Like the whole PowerPoint presentation is so rich. Thank you very much for also willing to share the PowerPoint presentation with us. We'll be expecting it on the JIIPC email, and we'll forward it to our mentees immediately. It's a lot to take in from our mentees. I hope you all had our jotters behind our side to take all the presentation our mentor just made. So we'll be moving on to our mentee's presentation immediately. Mr. Dennis, do we have 2 groups or just 1 group? One of the mentees can also just respond. Do we have 2 groups or 1 group?
2 groups.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So,
group 1. Group 1 can go first on their PowerPoint presentation. You have 15 minutes maximum to wrap up your PowerPoint presentation, and afterwards our mentor would comment on it before we start taking our questions. And also live question is also encouraged. You can send in any question you have for our mentor on the chat box, or you can unmute yourself during this question and answer session to also ask your question. So group 1, I hope you're ready. You can share your screen and start your presentation. Your time starts now.
all right, good evening, everyone. So I'm going to be sharing my screen now. I'm the presenter for group 1. So please let me try to share my screen now. Please, can we all see my screen?
Your screen is loading.
Yeah. Okay. I'm very sorry it's taking some time.
You can see your screen now. You can start.
Okay. Sorry, I'm trying for this to be too. Okay, so thank you for the chance to do this presentation on behalf of group 1. So the topic we are to speak on is film, business, and law. And my name is Deborah Folowo Shele. So now, moving on, I am going to be speaking on 4 major points. One is the introduction. The second is ownership. Then the third is film financing and collective management. Then I'm going to be doing my conclusion. Now, going on to introduction, filmmaking is the process by which a motion picture is produced. Filmmaking process has to do with various stages down from the script writing to the production stage. Now, as we all know, film making in Nigeria, it is done by Nollywood, which is the famous film industry in Nigeria. And from various research, the Nollywood industry has over 6.4 billion US dollar in revenue and has brought out close to, more than 2,500 movies each year. Going on, the legal framework for the Nigerian film industry. So it is managed by the Nigerian Copyright Act and the National Film and Video Censor Board, which is the NFVCB, the Acts of 1993. So these two acts are the major acts that deals with the production and distribution of film in Nigeria. Moving on, I will be talking on the stages of film production. So like I said during the introduction, we have various stages of film making, but there are three major stages. One is the pre-production stage. The second is the production stage. Then the third one is the post-production stage. During the pre-production stage, this is the first stage where the whole idea of the film is being conceptualized. And this stage has to deal with the sourcing of capital, the sourcing of location, this screw casting, and various other processes which make up the pre-production stage. Now, going to the second stage, which is the production stage. Sorry. So this stage is the main stage where the whole film is being actualized and the shooting process will now begin. And during this stage, the lawyers and legal practitioners do have various roles to also play by negotiating and drafting some documents and agreements. Now going on to the third stage, which is the post-production stage. So this stage is the final stage, which has to do more of marketing and distribution of the film to the target or the audience, sorry. Now going on to the next slide, please hope we can all hear me and hope I'm not going too fast.
We can hear you loud and clear, and you're not going too fast. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. So now the next slide, which talks on ownership. So ownership in film production has to deal with the rights of legal control over the film process and the film making. And ownership can vary depending on factors like agreements, licensing, and employment. Sorry. Now, ownership can be done through the creation of agreements between the various parties that have roles to play in the film production process. And this agreement can either be expressed or implied. Express meaning it can be written or it can be oral. While the implied agreement means it is done inside the contract or the agreement. Going to the next slide. Then, sorry, I am going to speak on ownership of film. According to the Copyright Act, ownership of cinematograph films is protected for 50 years after the end of the year in which the work was first published. Now I would go to my next slide, which is the chain of title. Chain of title has to deal with the various agreements and licensing done throughout the different stages of film making. It is the transfer of rights and title in a film. The chain of title documentation can include the copyright clearance on music, the trademark clearance, the talent agreement, and the proof of errors and omission in insurance. Now going to the next slide, which is the right of